Hello, everyone, and welcome to AMI's webinar on solving e-commerce obstacles in Latin America. My name is John Price. I'm one of the founding partners of AMI, and I'm joined by a panel of 5 in total. Before I introduce our illustrious panel, I'd like to just spend 2 minutes of your time explaining who is AMI and why we're here. AMI stands for America's Market Intelligence, and as our name implies, we focus on Latin American and Caribbean markets across different industries. We've been doing so for the last 25 years. And like many consulting firms, we divide ourselves into industry practices, and 2 of those practices will be featured today in the webinar, one being payments and the other being logistics. What we do as a consulting firm is we help companies make informed decisions. Be that entering a market, choosing a partner, finding ways to grow their business, and finding ways to compete for their business. Our team is based in Miami, San Francisco, Mexico City, Sao Paulo, and Santiago de Chile, with affiliates across 90 cities in the region. So without further ado, what I'd like to do next is ask our panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Lindsay Lehr. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Great to be with you today. Thank you, John, for the introduction. My name is Lindsay Lehr. Some of you may have been on webinars with me previously. I am the head of the payments practice here at AMI. I've been with the firm for about 5 years now and have been very focused on the past couple of years really diving into e-commerce, digital payments, and looking at what is occurring with the digitization of Latin America. So I'm happy to be here today. Thank you.
Well, I believe it's my turn. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Diego Rodríguez. I'm the co-leader of the logistics practice. I've been with AMI for the past 5 years. And during the last couple of years, I've been focused on the logistics industry, especially in Latin America. We have been serving logistics providers and also logistics users in Latin America. And I hope this webinar is going to be very insightful for all of you. And it's my pleasure to participate this afternoon with all of you.
Hi, my name is Fernando D'Alessio. I'm co-founder and CEO of Juntos.com. We're Latin America's first online shopping mall. Previously, I co-founded Linio, which was more the Amazon business model. So I've been in Latin America doing e-commerce for the past 5 to 6 years and battling with these huge payments and logistic pain points. So happy to be here, and we'll talk a little bit more about our experience in several countries in Latin America. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. This is Felipe Iván Campos. I'm a supply chain professional. Currently, I am working for FedEx. I have been working for FedEx 2 years as a project engineer for the supply chain division. Previously, I worked for Liverpool for 8 years, working in logistic projects. So happy to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to AMI.
Well, thank you. A special thanks to Felipe and Fernando for giving us their time today. And we are very pleased to have received over 200 registrants for this webinar. So it's a robust audience, and I want to let you all know that towards the end of our webinar, which is set to last 1 hour, we will leave time to receive your questions, which you'll be able to forward to us through chat mode. And to the best of our ability, we'll try to address all of those. The reason we're here is the opportunity and the frustrations of e-commerce in Latin America. E-commerce has grown at an impressive pace in recent years, but still remains underpenetrated in terms of the user base, and still remains unfulfilled of its potential in many ways because of the logistic challenges it faces. We believe that all of the pillars are in place for this market to be much bigger than it is. The fact that Latin America is highly urbanized and concentrated in its populations means that there's scalability in big markets. The fact that half the population is under 35 means that it is a tech-savvy and early adopter mentality when it comes to technology use. And the fact that more than half of cell phone owners in Latin America use smartphones means that they have the tools in their hands to conduct e-commerce. Another really interesting metric is the fact that square meterage of retail space in Latin America is 1/6 of the per capita basis that it is in the United States. And if you know the region and you travel outside of the top 10 to 15 cities in the region, you know that the brick and mortar retail options available to people are limited beyond basic goods, which means that if you live in a second or third tier city and you want to buy anything out of the ordinary, your only way to source it is either to get on a plane and go somewhere and get it, or order via e-commerce. And so the potential for e-commerce in terms of the percentage of retail it represents is in fact higher than more mature retail markets like the United States. And yet today its penetration is about 1/3 to 1/4 of that of the United States in terms of what e-commerce represents as a percentage of total retail. So why is that? And there's really the reasons or the obstacles that have limited e-commerce thus far fall into two broad camps. One related to payments and the different obstacles that consumers face when trying to pay for their goods, as well as the logistics function, which is really comes down to both last mile and cross-border bottlenecks and challenges and cost challenges of delivering products in a quick and cost competitive way. So that fits very nicely into two of our practices at AMI, and of course the expertise of Felipe Campos and Fernando D'Alessio. So at this point what I'd like to do is hand over to Lindsay, who will walk us through the payment obstacles, her field of expertise, before we then switch over to Diego to run us through logistics.
Great. Thanks, John. Thanks for that introduction. You know, some of you on the webinar may have heard me speak about these issues before. I've been really focused on helping international merchants and payment players understand what the local payments landscape looks like in Latin America and what some of the challenges are that need to be addressed. Before we get into really the specifics of the payments, let's just lay out what e-commerce looks like in Latin America. And Fernando, we're going to ask you to jump in at any point here, kind of with your specific experience. Fernando's been very active, as he mentioned, in Peru, Chile, Colombia, and elsewhere. So we're going to get his insights. And another caveat to this that's very important to keep in mind is that we're talking a lot about Latin America as a region, and a lot of these figures that I'm going to present represent Latin America. But of course it's very important to keep in mind that every country is different, every country has its own specific payments challenges, but the overall lessons for the region remain similar. So when we look at what does e-commerce look like in Latin America today, this first chart here, we see the cross-border versus the domestic opportunity. You know, cross-border e-commerce has been occurring and growing in Latin America for more than 10 years. Really, it's very excellent success of international marketplaces, Amazon, eBay, and more recently Chinese players, AliExpress, Wish, Deal Extreme, are becoming increasingly popular. And the differentiators there are price and variety of what's available in the local market. However, because of some of the very real challenges that we're going to discuss related to payments and logistics, that cross-border slice remains, you know, a little bit less than 20% of the total market, and the domestic market is that bulk that cross-border merchants are increasingly wanting to encroach upon. When we look at how this breaks down from a vertical standpoint, between retail, travel, and digital goods across the region. In general, retail makes up about 50% of total spend. And when we look at how cross-border interacts with these different verticals, it's very intuitive. It makes sense. We see a much higher share of cross-border spend in travel and digital goods, goods for which there's no logistical complication. And retail in Latin America is really dominated today, and this is changing, but it's dominated today by big department stores, big players, and big marketplaces. Really a handful of players are controlling the bulk of this retail spend. And this is changing as kind of local smaller players, second-tier size merchants are starting to play in e-commerce. But Fernando, does that kind of ring true with the experience you've seen in the local market?
Yeah, Lindsay, it's very interesting because before coming back to Latin America, I was 4 years in London and 10 in New York, and I always wonder like why the big players like Amazon or eBay weren't in Latin America, and I just understood why they weren't maybe about 6 years ago, and it's because the two main points that John and you were mentioning, logistics was not easy because most logistic operators would just deliver bank statements or utility bills, which is very easy. But once you tell them, look, you need to deliver products of all sizes, packages of all sizes, weight, values, it became a lot more difficult. And the second one is payments. And to that point where you say differentiators, price and assortment or variety, I think those are the first two pillars, but what we took into advantage 6 years ago was a third pillar, which we call convenience or service. And it was basically because in several countries like Mexico, Colombia, and Peru specifically, it's countries where most people don't have credit cards. And I think we're going to cover it later, but yeah. Credit card penetration is super small. So what we did is we innovated with cash on deliver or bank payments. And I think that's what made us, both at Linio and Juntos, have a competitive advantage, because we were tapping onto a population that had never and were never going to be able to buy online because they didn't have credit cards. So I think you can cover it now, but it's very interesting how consumers are very different. And even the small population that have credit cards, they don't feel like they have the trust to buy online. So it was tough to start 6 years ago. And I'm specifically talking about Mexico, Colombia, and Peru, because if you go to Brazil, Argentina, and Chile, they've been doing e-commerce for at least 15 years. Mm-hmm. So, and it's because they have a higher e-commerce penetration, bankarization, and credit card penetration.
Yeah, thank you for that segue. That plays perfectly into the next couple of slides I'm going to present. I talk a lot. I'm based in San Francisco. I'm talking a lot to international merchants who are in full international expansion, looking at Latin America. And Brazil and Mexico tend to be the first markets that they look at. And it's really interesting when I'm in conversations, sort of the outside of the region itself, there's very little understanding for what the local landscape looks like. So this slide kind of tells the story. Credit card penetration, first off, is lower in Latin America than it is in the U.S. And other developed markets. And you know these first countries listed here, Brazil, Argentina, Chile. You may say, well, 55% credit card penetration, that's not that bad. What people don't realize is that a very small percentage of those credit cards are actually enabled for international purchases, meaning that those consumers in Argentina, in Brazil, in Chile, in Uruguay can't access your product if you're based outside of their home country. And a lot of those credit cards, sort of the most basic credit cards in the market, are not even enabled for e-commerce. And so, you know, banks have been very hesitant to opening up and enabling e-commerce. That's changing, and local companies are working with banks to change that. But credit card penetration is a big problem. And you know, this last kind of bullet, this last icon on the slide really speaks volumes. Across Latin America, only 68% of all e-commerce volume is spent using a local payment method, which is only available to international merchants if they're connected to local acquirers and local payment networks. So that's equal to $43 billion in addressable market. Now the entire market today is $63 billion. So that's a huge majority of spend that merchants can't access if they're not operating in the local countries or have some sort of partner that enables them access.
There's one thing, Lindsay, that if I can add, this is from the consumer side, but another very important point is that when I came back 6 years ago, it was funny because there's something that payment providers typically offer which is probably like a no-no in e-commerce in developed markets like the US. You know, for example, they would say, okay, you can use my payment platform, but you're going to be redirected to my platform, and it's going to use 3D secure. So, and we all know that, at least when I lived 10 years in New York, I never had to have a redirect to another site and use like the Verify by Visa, the MasterCard Secure Code, which gives consumers even more doubt about buying online, because first of all, they don't even understand what is Verify by Visa or MasterCard Secure Code. So that makes it even more difficult to buy locally.
Absolutely, and I think you mentioned something that was really crucial, is the lack of trust in Latin America. So you as a merchant may say, look, I don't care about the bottom of the pyramid. My market are really these international credit card holders, affluent people. They're my main market. That's all well and good, but the problem is many of those customers, even though they have a card, are still afraid of using their credit card online. So as this slide shows, you've got a spectrum from upper middle class folks to the emerging middle class folks who are using local payment methods, many of them cash-based, preferring to use their credit card only when they enter a store or at a merchant they really trust. For everything else, they may choose some other sort of other payment method that is safe and that provides them with the trust they need. And this is changing and this is improving, but this is a reality that merchants and payment providers need to really consider. And what I think is really interesting is the fact that e-commerce, which has penetrated this kind of top of the pyramid pretty well so far, is going to, growth in e-commerce in the region is going to come from the middle of the pyramid. So this slide shows smartphone holders in Latin America. Today in 2017, a little more than 200 million smartphone holders. I like to use this as a proxy for people who are online and connected to the internet and potential consumers. As you can see, 50% of smartphone holders today do not have a credit card. Okay, another 84 million only have a domestic-only credit card. And these two groups are the ones that are growing the fastest. And that's because smartphone penetration is growing a lot faster than banking penetration. So it's very easy to get a smartphone nowadays. They've become really affordable. However, banks are still really hesitant to issue credit cards to a wider group of the population. So looking forward, it's going to be crucial for any sort of e-commerce strategy to focus on folks who are solidly in the middle class and even the emerging middle class who are starting to use e-commerce for the first time. Here are some examples of local merchants, local payment processors who are innovating, who recognize these challenges and are innovating, finding unique, locally specific ways to enable e-commerce and to enable more and more people to use the channel. And Fernando has specific experience in that, so I'm going to let him kind of talk a little bit more about his experience with Juntos, with Linio, and give us some examples of some creative solutions that we're seeing locally.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so 5-6 years ago when I came back, we realized that we had to reach pretty much every single person in Colombia, Peru, Mexico, and then Argentina, Chile, and so forth. And we realized that some countries clearly didn't have that much credit card penetration. So we decided to innovate it and we launched cash on delivery. And it was very successful, but it was actually very hard as well because, first of all, the two biggest bottlenecks got together. First was that logistic operators, which we're going to cover later, didn't want to deliver packages because that was not their core business back then. The big international players like UPS, FedEx, DHL, in most countries didn't do door-to-door service. They would do international shipments, but they wouldn't do door-to-door. One exception was Mexico, like FedEx and UPS and DHL would do in Mexico, but they wouldn't do it in Colombia and in Peru and so forth. So we had to work with local logistic operators. And the second one is that given that we launched cash on delivery, those same people that were a little reluctant to deliver packages of all sizes, values, and so forth, they weren't the ones going to be gathering, collecting the cash for us. So payments and logistics, the two biggest bottlenecks, had to go together to actually tap on this mass market population in each one of these countries. So first, Linio, we were one of the first ones to launch like general merchandise B2C platform. And it was a similar business model to Amazon. So part was retail, part was marketplace. And we launched some payments like cash on delivery and bank payments. At Juntos, we decided to just launch a 100% marketplace platform, very similar to a shopping mall, just online. So we focused on opening storefronts for brands and retailers. And one of the things that the advantage of this platform versus the previous one I worked is that here we launched since day first as a platform that would help you have an online channel. Whether you had an e-commerce or not, it would still be a complementary channel. So today, 80% of the 400 stores we have in Peru don't have e-commerce. So their first e-commerce store is in our platform. And 20% understood that in traditional retail, they typically had standalone stores and stores in malls, and both were their stores. However, online, most people, just the ones that do operate e-commerce, only had their standalone e-store. So with Juntos, they would have their e-store within an e-mall. So here we took advantage of some of the pain points and did a little bit of work to improve payments and logistics. So in payments and logistics, what we did was what some department stores do right now, which is click and collect or store pickup. So those that do have a credit card but don't like buying online because they don't know if the product will arrive or the credit card is going to be cloned, they could actually buy online or actually reserve the product and buy and pay when you pick it up in a store. So we kind of took both payments and logistics and did a little bit of innovation. The other things that we did, and right now most platforms don't have this, is something that Amazon has in the US, and this is perfect for recurrent products. And one of the things we're trying to do is basically educate consumers. Because right now, credit card penetration is low, but what we want to do is make them start trusting the system. So with Subscribe and Save, basically you need a credit card, but you get automatic discounts between 5 to 20% discount when you buy diapers, when you buy toilet paper, pet food, coffee, things that you know that you're going to be buying at least once a month. And one of the things is that by giving this automatic discount, we're actually promoting so that people get the credit card and get this additional discounts. So that's one of the things that how we're tackling both logistics and payments, and we're trying to innovate basically to do the three things that we focus on: convenience, service, price, and also the assortment and the catalog the assortment that we're having.
Fernando, let me ask you. I noticed on you have enabled. You've been a big proponent of cash on delivery and enabling cash on delivery. And a lot of merchants are afraid of cash on delivery. It's too costly. It's too risky. I'm going to send my product. I'm going to invest all this in logistics. They may not even pay for it. So what would you say to merchants who have that fear? You know, is it a stepping stone to get people into e-commerce? What is the payoff in the end?
So we typically tell them, look, if you want to tap on the 20% market that have credit cards, go ahead. But the ones that are really going to give you the volume and the sales are going to be the 80% that don't have credit cards. So we typically say, look, we've already negotiated with 10 logistic operators, and they're going to do the cash on delivery, and don't worry, because in payments, you have a commission that you need to pay to Visa or MasterCard. In logistics, for cash on delivery is exactly the same. Instead of paying a payment cost, what you do is pay an insurance. And it typically varies. For example, for fashion, it could be anywhere between 0.5 and 1%. For electronics, it's typically 2%. So it's similar to the commission that you would get with Visa and MasterCard. And here you're just doing it for cash on delivery. So we typically tell them, look, we have a lot of experience with cash on delivery. You should do it. That way you can tap on 100% of the market and not only 20% of the market. And the other thing that we're trying to do is promote cross-border e-commerce. Because right now, there's a lot of cross-border coming from the US to Latin America, or from China to Latin America. But what we really don't see is some of the local brands in Mexico, Peru, Colombia, Chile. Why can't they sell from their countries to the US, to Europe, to Asia, to China, Australia, and Africa? So that's one of the things that we're actually talking to the global logistic operators like DHL, FedEx, TNT, UPS, so that we can actually start offering this and have e-commerce be a motor for the whole economy in our region.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Okay, wonderful. I'm sure there'll be more questions for Fernando. I meant to say at the beginning of the presentation, John mentioned that we'll be taking live questions. To all our audience members, on your control panel here, there's a little drop-down arrow where you can write in your questions. And we'll be, if time permits, we'll answer those live at the end. Otherwise, we'll answer them offline. So please feel free to write in with any questions that you may have. Excellent. Fernando, thank you. We are going to turn it over to our logistics experts. We touched on some issues that might be of interest, but I will let Diego take it from here.
Thank you, Lindsay. I really appreciate it. And just to start with the presentation, I'd like to point out that I'm going to focus during these 10 to 15 minutes in 5 logistics challenges that e-commerce players find in Latin America, and some of the solutions that can be implemented, and some of the solutions that logistics providers can support and can provide to e-merchants in the region. So to start with, moving on to the next slide, I'd like to show you the Logistics Performance Index in 2016 published by the World Bank. And the goal with this chart is to show you that the logistics issues are not to be blamed only on the logistics providers, but also the poor infrastructure and the lack of automation at air and seaports and road infrastructure in Latin America. You would be surprised to see that Rwanda and Mozambique are ranked higher than several countries in Latin America. Countries like Uruguay, Argentina, Peru, Colombia, Costa Rica, and the complicated internal and customs regulations in different countries, and also the lack of transparency and rampant corruption that have plagued the logistics sector for years is slowing the movement of goods and, of course, increasing the costs throughout the region. The regional logistics market in Latin America is highly fragmented, as Fernando was saying, but DHL, FedEx, and UPS are the largest players, and there are thousands of local and regional companies working different parts of the supply chain and the last mile delivery, and there are a lot of companies that can support your e-commerce operations in the region. And if we take a look at the chart, we will see that Chile, Mexico, and Brazil are the highest ranked countries in the index, thanks to their efforts to facilitate and expedite the movement of goods at customs and their continuing investment in roads, ports, and airport infrastructure compared to other countries like Colombia or Peru or Argentina and Venezuela that lag behind in these two aspects. And if we move on to...
Felipe, may I add one more thing?
Of course.
For example, one thing that I was surprised in logistics is that in several countries, specifically Peru and other countries in Latin America, there's no habit of using a zip code. So that makes logistic operators, their work a lot harder, because sometimes it says lote C, manzana D, and you're like, there's like 1,000 of those in the country. So how can you really get? And I think that's something the government should promote, because once you have zip codes in place, it's a lot easier for logistic operators to reach to the destination easier, you know. And the other thing is what you say, the last mile is super hard for geographies like, for example, Peru. You know, you have the coast, you have the mountains, you have the jungle, and typically once you go to the jungle, the last mile is not done by a big player or a local player. It's done by a mom and pop job, and you have zero tracking number or tracking facilities for that. So, as you say, it's very hard for logistic operators without the proper infrastructure to actually do a better job.
Correct, and in some countries as Panama, Costa Rica, they don't even use addresses. They just use in the corner of the White House, of the church. So it's a hard task for logistics operators, and I'd like to show that it's not to blame them only, but the government also needs to support logistics operators and e-commerce in order to facilitate the transactions and the delivery of products. And if we move on to the next slide, we will see the first obstacle in the series of challenges that I'm going to show you, and it's fulfillment delays and lack of reliability. Now that we have seen the poor logistics performance in the region, we can understand some of the reasons why logistics is an obstacle, and behind also the underperformance of the e-commerce in Latin America. And contrary to what occurs in the US, in several Latin American countries like Argentina, Colombia, or Peru, half of e-commerce deliveries require a week or more to be delivered. A common issue for many online stores is overselling, thanks to the rapid growth rates that merchants experience, and they have more orders than the inventory to fulfill them, and also they lack the infrastructure beyond first-tier cities like Mexico City, Bogotá, Lima, Buenos Aires. When we talk about second-tier or third-tier cities, that the only way they can access products is via e-commerce, merchants sometimes they lack the infrastructure and they lack the know-how on the fulfillment. And online stores then have to communicate to customers that the item is out of stock, which leads obviously to lost sales and poor consumer sentiment. Also, when we talk about the last mile delivery, traffic is so overwhelming in Latin America that same day or next day shipping terms can be impossible to fulfill. If we talk about Mexico City, which has one of the worst traffics in the world, or Bogotá or Sao Paulo, it gets even more complicated. And when distribution centers do not operate on 24-hour shifts, shippers are prevented from picking up goods at night when there is less traffic and when the operations can be easier to complete due to security concerns or costly overtime and a lack of trained personnel as well. So some of the solutions that we have identified for merchants and e-commerce players is first, using third-party fulfillment centers and centralized distribution to customers from DCs will basically relieve online businesses of the necessary physical space to store all products, which is beneficial for merchants without the capacity to directly manage inventory. And second solution that we identified is using a mixed matrix of last mile delivery providers, from large national coverage to local small on-demand delivery firms that are sprouting across the region, like Rápido in Brazil, in Mexico, in Colombia, 99 Minutos, Chasqui, Aisen, or Banner. So this approach could give you the flexibility depending on the type of customers and the type of needs and the flexibility that customers are requiring in terms of promised delivery times. If we move on.
It's interesting, just to, in some markets, just for example, Peru, those new players, there's at least 5 players doing exactly the same. You have, as you say, Chasqui, Aisen, Urbaner, Pickup, even Cabify Express and Uber in some countries do it as well. So, and there's others, you know, Mensajeros Urbanos in Colombia, Rappi, which is in Mexico and Colombia. They're tackling these problems that we have, you know, and one of the things that most logistic operators, even the local ones, are failing is that most don't do the same day delivery. So all these new players are actually getting into that niche of doing deliveries within 2 to 4 hours.
Correct, and they're providing the tracking tools to know exactly when are you going to receive your product and where is your product at every moment, which is basically meeting that gap that used to be between the logistics providers that didn't have those trace and tracking tools in place, so customers didn't have the information to know where their products were and where they were going to be delivered. And moving on to the second challenge, cross-border customs delays and corruption is preventing most merchants in the US or in Europe and in Latin America to ship products to the region because they're afraid of finding issues with local customs and customers' complaints about lost and damaged products, about how to deal with returns, and bureaucracy in Latin America and red tape are one of the greatest hurdles for cross-border online purchases. According to a recent study that AMI conducted in 2016, we identified that cross-border parcels encounter 5 unique obstacles compared to other continents. The first one is high cost in air transportation, also high import taxes, as you could see in Brazil or in Colombia, long transit times and underdeveloped shipping infrastructure in place in these countries, and of course, a cumbersome, corrupted customs. All of these have discouraged shoppers and companies in Latin America to take advantage of cheaper cross-border products. And here, Felipe, I'd like you to please tell us about how FedEx can help companies better handle cross-border e-commerce sales, because I'm familiar and I know that FedEx offers a complete end-to-end solution to both large firms and SMEs to handle cross-border in Latin America.
Correct. For FedEx, these cross-border operations are day-to-day operations. We have inclusive one single company or division called FedEx Trade Networks that do this trading administration for the logistics, right? So you come with FedEx Express, and they FedEx Trade Network do the cross-border administration, and then you put it in the country you need. So for FedEx and all these big companies of transportation, it's a very simple process, and it's a day-to-day operation that can help small and medium e-commerce or players to do this cross-border operation easier.
And several merchants are always afraid of how I'm going to be able to handle the logistics to send my product, let's say, to the US. I'm selling to a US customer, or someone in Europe, or someone in Mexico if I'm a Colombian merchant. And DHL, UPS also offer solutions in terms of how to export. They give you a specific guidelines on how to export, how to support you, how to move on and please your customers. And also, the second solution that we identified is that several startups are also sprouting in the region, trying to tackling the high shipping cost, and one of that is Logab. It's a very interesting startup in Latin America, which basically connects travelers in the US, in Latin America, willing to make room in their luggage for products purchased by shoppers in other countries, which is basically an Uber for the air transportation. So other companies are trying to tap into this new market, and we encourage companies to also explore this type of new solutions that are trying to facilitate cross-border e-commerce in Latin America.
Correct. There is not only the operation of e-commerce, there are also the consultancy. We can bring consultancy to small, medium companies doing e-commerce in order to provide the experience of how to trade, how to pack, how to do I don't know, choose the best option of transportation, maybe not fly, but by ground, maybe to drop somewhere that is cheaper than another place. This consultancy service is also provided for e-commerce players.
Diego,
and I know that.
Sorry, Fernando. Let me just jump in with a question from the audience here. It's kind of a fun question. Will these new delivery companies, so the startups that you were referring to, Diego and Fernando also, will these new delivery companies work on Catholic holidays, even if they're the only ones open? And I don't know if you know the answer to that question individually, but it kind of points to an interesting phenomenon and a need, right? There's limited service available. You know, in the U.S. we're used to 365-day-a-year service. So what have you seen locally?
Well, I haven't seen it work on weekends and Christian holidays, but that's something that we are actually pushing, because I remember when Amazon launched Sunday delivery with USPS in the US, it was very successful, because if you think about it, Sunday morning you're typically at home, you know, there's no miss. And in Latin America, it's very different than the US. I remember when I lived in New York, I would buy in Amazon, I would leave my apartment at 8 a.m., come at 10 p.m., and the box would still be waiting in front of my apartment. In Latin America, unfortunately, you cannot do that, because within 5 minutes, it's going to be gone.
Correct.
So it's a lot harder to deliver here. So you need to make sure that the customer is going to be there to receive the product. So why not deliver on Sunday mornings or bank holidays when people are typically at home, you know? So, but right now, as far as I know, they're not doing it, but I think that there's a great opportunity there to explore.
I agree with Fernando. I haven't seen it so far, and that could be a great differentiator for these startups to start pushing the delivery, and also will be easier for them. Let's not forget about that. When a last mile delivery company needs 2 or 3 attempts to deliver that product to a customer, it's not profitable anymore. When you just need 1 attempt and you're pretty sure that on Sunday or a bank holiday you're gonna find the customer, that's very profitable for you, and you will be pushing and differentiate yourself compared to the competition. So that's something that we encourage logistics startups in the region to start doing in Latin America.
Correct, Diego. But you cannot handle to move all your volume to Sunday or Saturday to deliver all e-commerce on that base. So all courier companies are developing services to drop the packages, as was mentioned before. You cannot deliver the packages outside the door because we'll be gone in a few minutes, but you can drop that package nearby the home of the office or someone who purchased it, and they can pick it up after hours before they leave their work, their jobs, and they can have next day 2-3 days deliveries, not in their homes, but in a retail, in a drop retail from a
in a locker, correct? Yeah, that's also gaining traction in Latin America. Lockers to deliver products in retail spaces. That's also a solution that it's been implemented by logistics providers. So if we move on to the third obstacle that we identified, is the lack of end-to-end responsibility, which basically only undermines consumers' trust in e-commerce. In Latin America, as in the US or in any developed country, consumers are looking for reliable online sellers and also trusted logistics companies that will take full responsibility for any delivery mishaps without question and will facilitate return and replacement of damaged goods. Let's not forget about that consumers always are looking for, in terms of logistics and the delivery, something that is fast, that is free, and that's convenient. And that's something that both logistics players and merchants too often have forgotten in Latin America. Sometimes merchants and couriers blame one another when products arrive late or damaged to the customer, and the shopper is in the middle of that situation without knowing who is responsible for replacing my products. Is the logistics company or is the online seller? And obviously, this situation only discourages those buyers that are afraid from purchasing online because they fear that without feeling, touching, or seeing the goods, a return will become a never-ending nightmare. So that's something that we encourage customers, that we encourage merchants to pay attention. A merchant must understand that when customers receive the product in their hands is when the sale is completed, not when I'm, as a shopper, click the bottom, the payment button in your website. That's not when the purchase is completed. It's when the customer is satisfied with the product. And we believe that there is much more to do in terms of the communication between merchants and logistics firms to provide that trace and tracking to please customers when they're buying online. So some of the solutions that we identified and that we suggest is that logistics providers need to make a greater effort to promote the outsourcing of fulfillment operations and to promote also the benefits that come with this end-to-end responsibility that merchants could gain having a reliable logistics provider. And the second one also is, as I was mentioning, improve the integration between the 3PL and the seller by upgrading, of course, the trace and tracking tools offered to customers, but these need to be also supported by the governments.
Diego, just being cognizant of time here, I want to make sure we have some questions for the audience and our panel questions. So why don't we, I know you have a couple more challenges to address, but why don't we turn it over to Felipe, and any additional, this deck will be shared with whoever would like to see it afterwards, so you'll have all of the details, and we're happy to answer whatever questions folks have. But I want to move on now to get some detailed insights from FedEx.
Lindsay, may I add one thing on the previous slide and 2 slides behind this?
Sure.
The return.
Yeah.
The return solutions.
This is something very interesting because when you typically measure NPS for e-commerce operations, one of the 5 things that you measure is actually how the post-venta, the return policy is. And one of the things that customers typically don't understand, and why I'm mentioning this is because it's logistics plus payments. When a product gets returned and the merchant says, okay, you can refund, typically credit card processors and banks in certain countries take 20 to 28 business days to refund the money. And this, as a customer experience, is horrible. And the worst part is that actually consumers or customers go against the e-commerce. And really the e-commerce already said, go ahead and refund the money. But I think banks and payment providers should work towards this, because if we really want to provide an outstanding customer experience, this return process and policy should improve significantly.
Right, and until it does, cash and delivery is going to continue to grow in popularity. Just like what you said, Diego, customers want to see and feel and touch the product, and cash on delivery offers a zero risk option for them to do that. And so until merchants can offer a seamless return experience, cash on delivery is going to become increasingly popular, which merchants want to step away from. So it's really the responsibility of the merchants and logistics providers to provide that good experience, to get away from something that they prefer not to offer. Great, thanks for that. Felipe, let's turn it over to you and hear a little bit about FedEx's expertise on these issues.
Well, I wanted just to take some significant information from the e-commerce as an industry, right? Just what you have mentioned before about how these problems or these struggles are making e-commerce in LAC more difficult than other countries. The challenges we just mentioned before are related maybe to 3 types of e-tailers or players in e-commerce. If you're a marketplace or a pure retailer, as I mentioned, for example, Amazon, or a retailer, you have different positions into these struggles, right? If you're a retailer, you can handle better this returns policy because you have several point of sale, you have already policies of returns, or it's different the way retailers front the returns than in a pure marketplace do it. Just because they have more infrastructure about distribution and about the inventory control and about the compliance of the returns of the money, as Fernando mentioned before, is because they may have their own credit card and they can give you the cash or the credit back in a few days instead of waiting the bank to refund you in 25, 30 days. I mean, the player is different in every case, but basically this new industry is making that the distribution or the supply chain have to be more demand related or focused. I mean, before you mentioned also that that one product, the demand of one product could be overwhelmed. For example, the new iPhone 8. Everyone will purchase the iPhone 8 on e-commerce and physical stores. Then the supply, the demand will be related where to put this iPhone nearby the customer, maybe in the retail, maybe in a big warehouse, where can I fulfill the whole country? But there are the difficulties that now the logistic and the e-commerce players need to worry about, right? Then maybe if we could pass to the next slide, please, Lindsay. Basically, in FedEx, what we do is to offer not only retailers, not only e-commerce players like pure e-tailers or marketplaces, everyone in this industry, fulfillment solutions, right? From end to end, we can handle warehousing for distribution in the whole country, then last mile operations with several services, very specific for e-commerce, cash on delivery. We can you can have one and done or hold at location, like I mentioned before. We have a whole bunch of services that can fulfill all these needs for any e-commerce player. So not only talking about FedEx, but how 3PLs, as mentioned before, can help the e-commerce to be a more reliable industry and to help the transit times and customer experience more effective, right? That's the idea, to have a central warehouse where you can handle products in a fast way. You can handle inventory. You can feel. You can do everything needed to increase or to optimize customer experience. Something that it's more difficult when you have a marketplace with such, and Fernando may know about this. It's more difficult to control a lot of vendors or people who put their product on sale from everywhere, that having one central warehouse where you can distribute and you can control that inventory to enhance the customer experience.
So one thing I want to add to that is that, for example, on the previous e-commerce, usually we would take at the beginning everything from a central warehouse, which was easier for logistics, but it also made the delivery time not as convenient because it would take longer. At Juntos, what we typically do is our platform is multi-warehouse. So the product could be fulfilled from any of the retail or brand stores or the warehouses. And that way, what we try to do is expedite the delivery, because it's proven that the faster you deliver, the happier the customer is, and the higher the repurchase rate, which at the end maximizes the customer lifetime value. So it's very important to work together, like e-commerce platforms, with logistic partners, so that we can manage to create this great customer experience, so that when we have an order, we can fulfill it as fast as possible and get it on the hands of the customer as quickly as possible.
Excellent.
Fernando and Felipe, if I could just butt in for a second. I apologize if there's a lot of noise at this end, but there is a real potential for political interference in the future if cross-border e-commerce begins to induce greater and greater trade deficits in Latin America. And Fernando, you talked about, therefore, the need to use e-commerce to help brands that have good market shares in domestic markets in Latin America to export. So from both of your perspectives and both of your solution sets, both those offered by you, Fernando, and by you, Felipe, what is needed to help mid-size Latin American companies export through e-commerce, and what solutions do either of your companies provide for that?
First, I think it's always useful to use case studies, and for example, this huge e-commerce platform like Alibaba. Like if it wasn't for cross-border e-commerce, they might have not been big enough as they are now. And they later developed their local e-commerce operations, but they started 100% cross-border e-commerce. And what Jack Ma realized is that there were 40 million of small business, medium enterprises, and that they had a lot of potential. And right now they were doing it like the traditional export and import operations, and they would talk on the phone and do the traditional way. And they realized that e-commerce was a great channel to give them access to not only like some purchasers in the US and Europe, but actually anywhere in the world. So I think the government in China has helped in terms of duty fees, in terms of expedited time, in terms of delivery, instead of all these red tape and bureaucracy and corruption. They need to get rid of that. Otherwise, we're going to be just selling locally in each one of our markets when we could actually be selling anywhere in the world. And we're not just talking about just like fashion products, electronics. We could be talking as traditional sectors, you know, and one industry that I'm very keen on exploring in the future is agriculture. Think about Peru, Argentina, Chile, Mexico. We have tons of great resources, and right now agriculture is one industry that has been typically done the traditional way, the old school way. And one huge opportunity that we have there is exploring cross-border e-commerce in an industry like that, and that would be kind of innovating, and that's something that we at Juntos already started exploring, and we started talking to agriculture companies and telling them, look, you don't need to open an office in China if you want to export in China. You can actually start doing it just online and see, and eventually if the volume is big enough, it might be worth actually opening an office there. So I think the government needs to step in, and if they really want to formalize several of our economies, because they always complain that there's a lot of informality, there's a lot of things that need to be worked on before that, like making hiring a little bit easier, firing as well and a little bit easier, incentivizing people, and they're going to realize that all of that, plus getting rid of red tape, corruption, expedited shipping, and lowering duty fees, I think all of that is going to help cross-border e-commerce both ways, from the rest of the world to Latin America, from Latin America to the rest of the world.
Fernando, what you bring up regarding agriculture really points to, as cross-border e-commerce grows within or coming from Latin America, that's really going to open up an opportunity for B2B payments as well.
Exactly.
You know, like you said, agriculture is processed in this old school way. I mean, B2B payments are still so archaic, and they're much higher ticket than consumer payments, and so that's going to be an increasing kind of behind the scenes opportunity that payments professionals need to be paying attention to as well.
That's right.
And Felipe, is FedEx looking at this? Do you assist particularly mid-size exporters coming out of Latin America who want an e-commerce platform? How do you see that demand shift?
Yeah, correct. We have a whole strategy based on this type of small and medium-sized enterprises to help them to bring their e-commerce fulfillment, to have a good partner about it. We have special services for them. As I mentioned before, we bring consultancy about packaging, about how to trade. We give them all what they need for start being an e-commerce player. So it's great to have, for example, Juntos or that marketplace platforms where they can come in internationally in 1 second. But also in the logistics side, they need to have a big partner, a strong partner to fulfill all the necessities, move one product to one point to another. So FedEx is definitely having a whole strategy about these small, medium-sized companies that is currently in place, and we have also one price and several prices, and the idea is to involve more and more companies, small, medium, to FedEx, and to bring them the opportunity to bring their products anywhere in the world.
Excellent. Lindsay, have we got time for any more questions from?
Sure. we have a lot of questions from the audience. Unfortunately, we won't be able to address all of them. We will answer these offline, however. I do want to, you know, we're just kind of running out of time here, but I do want to mention one question here that I'm sure is of interest to many, and it's kind of an interesting one. It says, could the panel please comment about the use of drones in Latin America? Yesterday, I witnessed a successful trial of Go Pato in Costa Rica, but I'm not sure if this can be a leapfrog for Latin America. So, you know, what have you guys seen so far locally? This is still a big question mark in the U.S. So, you know, curious as to what the patterns are so far in Latin America.
I think there's clearly a regulation that needs to be put in place because you don't want to have drones mess up with like commercial planes. But I think the biggest problem is going to be like the same reason why you wouldn't leave a package in the front of a door in an apartment or a house. They would steal it. I think if somebody sees something flying with a package, they will just knock it down and bring it down and then take it. So I think it would be great to have it. I think there's a lot to be done before that happens in emerging markets like Latin America.
Yeah, I totally agree with Fernando. It will be in Latin America. It will be harder than in the U.S. to have a policy to have all these complaints for having drones delivering in terms of the security.
Yes, that's still far away from my perspective to happening in Latin America. More than 5 years, I would say, or even more.
Okay. It's interesting to see that we're seeing some pilots occur even in, you know, smaller markets like Costa Rica. So these things can tend to surprise you. Okay. Great. John, do you want to kind of? We've got a couple more slides here just to close out the session. Sure.
Like Lindsay pointed out, everyone's going to receive a copy of this. Even if you actually couldn't attend, but you registered for the webinar, you will receive this complete package. But on these last few slides, what we're pointing out is just some sources of information out there, including information that we publish at AMI in as white papers, as well as on our newsletter called Perspectiva. But there's also sources out there that you can find from third-party sources, and I believe we mentioned some of those on the next slide. But most importantly on this one, let me just, if we go back just a sec, want to point out that we do have a couple of white papers that are directly related to this issue in Brazil especially. And Brazil is the biggest prize for foreign e-commerce suppliers who want to crack into Latin America. It's generally the market they look at first, but it's also one of the more complicated ones. And so we have a white paper that deals specifically with that. And we have a whole reams of articles related to e-commerce, both on the payment side and logistics side, that are published in our Perspectiva.
Excellent.
So thank you on behalf of all of us. We appreciate everyone's time. We're all busy, and I hope this is being informative to everyone. I've certainly learned some new things. I want to give a special thanks to Felipe and Fernando for lending us their time and their knowledge. So thank you to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye.
Bye.